MMA and UFC betting has evolved significantly over the past several decades. The rise of online gambling platforms and apps has radically changed the UFC betting world, and it has now blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar industry capable of generating millions of dollars both annually and even monthly. Essentially, no matter where you are in the world, thanks to these platforms, you can get in on the action too, if you're of legal age and are able to successfully pass the validation and verification processes. These processes typically involve submitting various forms of photo identification and valid banking documents. It's important to note that we are not trying to endorse or encourage gambling. We are simply laying out some undeniable facts. So today, we are looking at some of the craziest UFC betting moments from fans or similar. You do not want to miss this list. But before we get into the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel with the notifications on so you don't miss any of the new videos we post. First up, we'll look at what's possible in the crazy world of UFC betting earnings. Back in 2015, the world saw one of the craziest bets and payouts ever in UFC history during UFC Fight Night 61 in Brazil. The Twitter sphere exploded when it was reported that someone bet a single dollar on a 9-play parlay and hit on a $48,291 win. For those who don't know how a parlay works, it's actually quite simple. A parlay is a combination bet, and they're a popular option for a number of UFC bettors because they have the ability to drastically increase a bet's potential payout. However, parlays are very risky. In a 3-play parlay, for example, you'd be betting on 3 fights in the same UFC event. In order for you to win the parlay and have it pay out, you must accurately predict the winner of each of the 3 fights. If you get one fight wrong, you lose the parlay and your initial bet. So, in the case of our friend who won $48,291 on a $1 bet, they were able to accurately predict the winners of 9 fights in the same event. That's totally crazy, and the odds of successfully pulling that off are astronomical. That's why the bet paid out so big. Next up, we'll talk about the evolution of UFC betting. UFC is arguably the most competitive sport fighting arena in the world, and the fact that the competition is so fierce makes for a very exciting and at times lucrative betting industry. If you follow the sport, then you know no fighter ever stays on top forever. Some of the fighters will go on 5 or even 10 fight win streaks, but eventually an underdog fighter will come along and put a stop to their streak. This is what makes betting on the UFC so thrilling and exciting. If you're planning to take a serious run at UFC betting, understand that it involves hours of research. You have to learn about the various types of bets that you can place, the types of fighters you're betting on, and of course you will have to study fight odds and statistics extensively. There's no question that the top bettors and winners in the world of UFC betting are putting in thousands of hours studying their craft. In many respects, being a professional UFC bettor is no different than a full-time job, but it comes with the added downside of income instability and volatility. Up next, we'll talk about more historically big and wild bets. When it comes to the world of professional UFC betting, perhaps no one is more well known than Dave Dave is known by UFC betting insiders as Vegas Dave. Dave made a huge sum of cash after 11-1 underdog Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey at UFC 193 in Melbourne, Australia back in 2015. Dave put $20,000 on Holly, and after she beat Ronda, he made a total of $240,000 US. You're probably thinking, okay, so this guy got lucky. Big deal. Who cares? Well, not exactly. Dave didn't just get lucky. He's a consummate master gambler. In fact, 1 month earlier, Vegas Dave placed a bet worth approximately $100,000 that the Kansas City Royals would win the 2015 World Series. And guess what? They did! This bet paid out a whopping $2.5 million. As you can see, at least in this example, luck had nothing to do with it. Up next, Vegas Dave makes another crazy bet. This time on UFC 196 in 2016, and again, it's on a Holly Holm fight. But Dave didn't bet on Holly to win. He bet against her, putting his money on Miesha Cupcake Tate instead, who was a plus 250 underdog in the fight. Miesha ended up beating Holly in the 5th round, and Dave won himself a cool $223,000 on a $77,000 bet. Vegas Dave is an all-star gambler in a league of his own. In 2020, he reportedly sold the most expensive baseball card in history for a jaw-dropping $3.9 million. Since rising to fame in the sports betting world, Dave has gone on to become a social media influencer with millions of followers, which are undoubtedly helping him to rake in even more millions of dollars. Next up, we'll talk about the largest bet in UFC history. Recently, in June of 2020, an anonymous American placed a staggering $1 million bet on super tough Brazilian UFC fighter Amanda Nunes to beat Felicia Spencer. What's even more incredible and absolutely bonkers is that the bet would only pay out $1,166,666.70. So the bettor wagered $1 million to only make $166,666.70, an extremely risky proposition, all for very little gain. The bet was place with the London-based online gambling site WilliamHill.com, which eventually reported the details of the bet to ESPN, citing it as the largest ever bet in UFC betting history. Up next, we'll talk about how even the best bettors can have historically bad days. Nothing can quite give a high-rolling gambler a humbling reality check like losing a $1 million bet. And that's exactly what happened to none other than Vegas Dave after placing a $1 million bet on Miesha Tate back in 2016 at UFC 200 held in Paradise, Nevada on the Vegas Strip. Tate's opponent, Amanda Nunes, dominated the fight from the start, broke Tate's nose, and submitted her in the first round. It took 3 minutes and 16 seconds for Amanda to beat Tate and the same amount of time for Vegas Dave to lose $1 million. One would think that losing such a massive amount of money would humble the cocky Vegas Dave, but they'd be wrong. In fact, after the fight, the professional bettor had this to say on Instagram in response to his historic and record-breaking loss. "We're still firing tonight. Lose 7 figures, just move on till tomorrow. That's part of the business. Win big or go home. Wouldn't want a different life. Again, I care more about Miesha's health and well-being than the money right now." Up next, we'll look at the world of sports gambling. In 2020, the worldwide sports gambling industry was valued at approximately $203 billion. It's an industry comprising roughly 31,000 businesses and nearly 200,000 employees. Make no mistake, this is a big deal. Also bear in mind that those figures do not take into account the underground, black market gambling world, but that's a whole other ballgame that we'll save for another day. It's important to note, however, that in the U.S. alone, the illegal gambling trade generates an estimated $150 billion annually. Finally, we'll end this video by talking about some of the biggest bets in sports history outside of the UFC. In 2019, a man by the name of James Adducci placed an $85,000 bet that PGA champ Tiger Woods would win the 2019 Masters. Well, Tiger did, and Adducci netted a 1,312% profit that paid out $1.2 million. What's even more ridiculous is that this was the first time in Adducci's life that he ever bet on sports. You've got to be kidding me. Incredible. The next bet we'll look at is even more absurd than the last. A woman named Taylor Palya bet on a 15-play parlay on 15 separate NFL games. She bet $5 and somehow managed to predict the winners of every single game. Taylor won a total of $105,000 on the $5 bet. If you do the math, that's an over 2,000,000% profit. Yes, you heard correctly, that's over 2,000,000% profit. Absolutely incredible. What's even more amazing, 5 of Taylor's 15 picks were underdogs, and the bet was only the second bet she'd ever made. Not too shabby, Taylor. Not too shabby at all. Another wild and crazy bet was made in the world of Premier League soccer when a Leicester City fan bet €100 that the club would win the 2015 Premier League Championship. Well, Leicester did, and the €100 bet paid out €200,000. The next wild bet we'll be looking at is equally mind-blowing. If you love golf, you know Phil Mickelson. He's one of the greats. Turns out Phil likes to gamble a bit too, and in the year 2000, Phil placed a $20,000 bet that the Baltimore Ravens would win the NFL Super Bowl. Apparently, the bet was placed before the season had even started, and you'll never guess who won. Yep, you got it. The Ravens won the Super Bowl. The $20,000 bet netted the already wealthy golfer with a total of $560,000. Lastly, if you're planning to dive into the world of sports gambling, please do so responsibly. Thank you for listening and watching. Please click like and subscribe to our channel. More exciting and informative videos are on the way.